Hello, everyone. Ben Briggs here for PPC Better, your Nashville-based digital marketing and AI sales agency. And today, what we're going to talk about is conversion tracking. Now, conversion tracking is super important if you are buying digital ads. Google Ads, Meta Ads are the two main platforms. But if you're doing any other kind of marketing, influencer marketing, SEO, any sort of driving traffic to your website that you want to get insight into what people do after they get to your website, then conversion tracking and having some sort of access to website analytics is going to be super important. Now, a lot of people are used to Google Analytics, or now it's called GA, the Meta Pixel, that tracks events for your Meta ads, and then there's also a Google Ads version of analytics that is more limited than the GA4 in terms of the different reports and visibility that you can get out of it, but it's another Google-based platform for measuring conversions. Now, what all three of those platforms have in common is that by default, and unless you've gone to significant lengths to change this, then you're using pixel-based tracking, what's called pixel-based tracking. So what is pixel-based tracking? Pixel-based tracking is a method that uses tiny invisible images called tracking pixels or web beacons. Other people might have other names for them to monitor user activity on websites or in emails or anywhere where you're loading digital content onto a customer's device. So when a user loads a page or opens an email containing the pixel, it sends a request to the server recording the actions such as clicks, page views, or purchases. This data helps marketers measure campaign performance, understand consumer behavior, and create targeted ads. So how it works, you got a small piece of code called the tracking pixel. When the user interacts with the content, opens the email, visits the web page, the pixel loads and creates a silent request to the server. This request includes information like the user's IP address, device type, browser, and sometimes cookies, which can link the action to a user's profile. So you could use a user ID, a Google Click ID, a Facebook Click ID. A lot of times those sorts of parameters are used to identify users. So the server records the information, allowing the company to track a range of the data. The sort of behavior that's tracked, user behavior, like we talked about, page views, clicks, how a user navigates through the site content, email engagement, maybe how long you look at the email, that you opened it, if you clicked any links in there. Conversions, this is usually to do with forms or to do with completing a checkout. Then the user can be directed to a specific page that indicates that they have purchased something or signed up as a lead, what have you. And then customer journeys, it can also give you insight into, like I said, how people are using your site. The most basic form of a pixel is just a single pixel, usually associated with emails. Conversion pixels are more like your GA4 or your Google tag or your Meta pixel. All of those, the GA4, Metapixel, and Google Tag can be used to build remarketing audiences. So those are some other common use cases that people think of for pixels beyond just tracking conversions. Um, Now, if you're using pixel-based tracking, and most people are, then one thing that you need to learn about or to understand in 2025 is that a lot of user privacy tools are working to prevent you from getting as much data from your pixels. And depending on which pixel you're using, how you're using it, the tracking, the attempts to block the tracking could get even more aggressive. So many browsers, email clients, and privacy tools are increasingly blocking pixels, so they won't allow the pixels to load, and then that prevents the user's device sending data back to your analytics system. So you might get incomplete data. For instance, it might strip all of your tracking parameters so that the visit looks like it looks like it came from direct traffic where somebody just typed in the name of your website versus through an ad, or it could block the visit altogether so the visitor doesn't get reported at all. And one of the big setups that is blocking tracking in 2025 is Apple. If you're using an Apple device and you're on the Safari browser, then for the most part, by default, you're going to be blocking at least some of the functionality of the Google Pixel and the Meta Pixel. A couple other examples of how people can block pixel tracking in Gmail. You can go to your settings and ask before displaying external images. So even just with a free Gmail account, you can go in and change your settings to where the open tracker for emails would not automatically work. For Apple Mail, you can do a similar settings change. Firefox and Safari both have built-in features to block third-party pixels. And for Google Chrome, there are a bunch of different extensions that you could use: AdBlock Plus, Pixel Block, Ugly Email. So there's a bunch of browser extensions that you could use to block tracking, and a lot of people do use those. Also, you could use a VPN, and even if the user has a VPN, if the user is using a VPN, then it's going to interfere with tracking really no matter what. But it's not a large percentage of people who use VPNs. Another way, like the big platforms like Google or Facebook could conceivably use user ID, if like a logged in user ID, to help their tracking tools get around someone who is using a VPN. They could use the logged in status to get at least some information. Maybe it wouldn't be the same as if the user wasn't using a VPN, but regardless, those are the different ways that someone could try to block tracking. A user could try to block tracking, and these are fairly heavily adopted. A significant portion of your web traffic, whether that's 20% or 60%, in 2025, are using different ways to block pixel tracking. So let's say that if you're an advertiser, why this matters is that you are losing visibility into some percentage of your traffic. And it's pretty rare at this point it's October 2025 now. It's pretty rare that you would have less than 20% of your users who are not in some way interfering with your pixel based tracking. So the solution to it is called server side tracking. And what server-side tracking basically does is it sends data directly from your server into the web analytics platform. So instead of your tracking pixel having to load on the user device and then send the data from the user device to the analytics platform, you offload that entire job to your own server. And there's also some privacy upgrades that have happened that allow, if you are using server side tracking, then some of the Google and the Meta Pixel are able to, or the tracking system, I shouldn't say the Pixel, the Meta and the Google tracking system are able to use upgraded parameters that are approved privacy safe, at least as far as I know, for the GDPR, if you're looking to comply with that. And then there's also various state laws. And my understanding is that, not legal advice, not financial advice, but my understanding is that for the most part, the server side tracking upgrades that have been made comply with the state laws. So if you're concerned about legal compliance, that would be an additional benefit to upgrading to server side tracking. But the main thing that you're going to get from server side tracking is much, much better data, much cleaner data, because instead of having 20%, 40%, 60% of your users blocking your tracking with pixel tracking, with server side tracking, it's much, much more accurate. It could be 95, 99% accurate with the server side tracking. So comparing pixel side tracking to server side tracking, for pixel based tracking, like we talked about, you got that small piece of code on your website. It tracks page views and different, it could track when people enter information into a form, when people click a link, etc. The pros of the pixel based tracking: it's very easy to implement. Most people already have some sort of pixel based tracking on their website. That's not to say that it's completely idiot proof. You can definitely, it's actually pretty easy. You don't have to be an idiot. You could be a normal, intelligent person and have issues where maybe you're loading the pixel twice, maybe there's some pages that don't have the pixel. So there's definitely errors that can happen with pixel-based tracking, but in general, it is a lot easier to implement than server-side tracking. It can give you real-time data, so the data can actually pass a little bit faster with pixel data compared to a server-side, and it's widely integrated in many advertising platforms. So the Google tag, the Meta Pixel, and a lot of the smaller, like your X ads and your Reddit ads, LinkedIn ads, a lot of those use pixels that you can just place on your website, and then they can give you some insight into what's happening with your advertising. But the cons of the pixel-based tracking, it's vulnerable to being blocked by ad blockers, privacy settings, like Apple's ITP, security tools that disable third-party scripts. You get incomplete or lost data when the tracking is blocked, and it can slow down the user experience because you're loading those scripts onto the user's browser along with the content that you want them to consume, whether you're doing lead gen or e-commerce. You can, if you're using server-side tracking, then it has the added benefit of speeding up the user experience a little bit. So with server-side tracking, when a user interacts with your site, the event data is sent to your own server first instead of the browser. The browser is sending it directly to the ad platform. Your server then processes the data and forwards it to the appropriate third-party platforms via server-side API calls. So this is basically taking the information that would have been loaded into the user's browser, putting that on your server instead, and then pushing it via your server via the API to Google or Meta, whatever the relevant platform is. And so the pros, it bypasses the ad blockers and browser restrictions, pretty much all of them. It gives you really, really pristine, crisp, clean data, much more accurate and resilient data collection. Like we talked about, allows it. It can definitely be made compliant with GDPR. Again, not legal advice. You should, if you're concerned about compliance, you should engage with a qualified legal representative. But if you set your server-side tracking to fire on consent, for example, then I believe that would put you in a very strong position in terms of complying with GDPR and similar regulations. So the server-side tracking also gives you greater control over the data. So if you get really advanced, you could send your own custom data parameters or slices or segments. And it can also improve your website performance because, like we talked about, now the processing is not required to happen on the user's side. The cons of server-side tracking, it's more complex to set up. Absolutely, it does require technical expertise. And this is where PPC Better, your Nashville-based digital marketing and AI sales agency, comes to the rescue. If you're looking to implement server-side tracking, we can absolutely help. The other con is that your data can be delayed a bit because of the way that you're processing and forwarding the data on your server. So you won't get access to those real-time reports like you would with the pixel-based tracking. But we think that the cons are very much outweighed by the pros. So if you, I would say if you spend at least, I mean, if you spend $1,000 a day on advertising, whether that's through all of your different digital platforms, if you're spending 30K a month on ads, you should absolutely move to server-side tracking because the amount of traffic that you have that you are not getting good information on could be some of your best customers. I mean, when you think about it, if you sell a product that costs a lot of money, there's a really good chance that your customers are using iPhones, which makes it even more likely that they're blocking your pixel-based tracking. So it could definitely give you a lot better visibility into who your best customers are, what is resonating with them, how are they using your website if you have server-side tracking. One of the first steps to setting up server-side tracking we recommend is to implement Cloudflare. And if you've got a web host that doesn't allow you to implement Cloudflare, then I definitely recommend thinking about shifting to a web host that does. Make sure that Cloudflare gives you access to the custom control of your DNS, and that can be having control of your DNS is something that you're going to need in order to implement a server-side tracking. From there, it gets really complex. And I can't really give an overview on how you would do server-side tracking in every different so if you're interested in learning more about how to implement server-side tracking or even just make your pixel-based tracking better, we could help with that. But again, like I said, we're recommending that most clients move to server-side tracking. If it sounds good, if you want to have access to 95 to 99% of all of your website traffic data and have it be much more likely to be correct in terms of what it's telling you as far as how did you acquire the customers, how are customers engaging with your website. If you want visibility into that data and you want to upgrade to server-side tracking, go to ppcbetter.com, click on the contact us, and you can schedule a strategy session to connect with me. And we can take a look at your current website, your current platforms that you're using to measure your customer engagement and find out what would be the best path to implementation for you in terms of how to get to server-side tracking. So thanks everybody for watching this video. And once again, I'm Ben Briggs for PPC Better, your Nashville-based digital marketing and AI sales agency. And thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.